Welcome everyone to WarThunder Histories, episode 22, and today we're looking at my personal favourite class of ship from World War II, the Atlanta-class light cruiser. We'll also be looking at the Atlanta's subclass, the Oakland Class, which was a number of revisions made to the Atlantas to improve their stability and increase their anti-air capability. As always, we'll talk about design and development, service history, notable combat action, and of course how the USS Atlanta performs in-game. I hope you enjoy. At the end of the 1930s, the United States Navy had begun to look towards replacing the older and now outdated Omaha-class cruisers with a new type of light cruiser. The US Navy wanted a light cruiser that could lead destroyer flotillas, acting as a flagship for them. The class would be intended to be armed similarly to destroyers it would be tasked with, along with being able to maintain speed with them. The lead ship of the new class, the Atlanta class, the USS Atlanta, was laid down on April 22, 1940 and was launched on September 6, 1941. She had an overall length of 541 feet, a beam of 52 feet and 10 inches, and a draft of 20 feet and 6 inches. Initially, the Atlantas were intended to be armed with 16 5-inch guns in 8 dual turrets, which made the Atlanta class the heaviest armed cruiser in the US Navy. The 5-inch gun was a dual-purpose gun both for engaging surface ships with high explosive and armor-piercing ammunition. Along with being able to fire variable time fuse shells against aircraft, they were designed to explode near the aircraft and destroy them with shrapnel. In addition to the Atlanta's 5-inch armament, they had 3 quad mounts of 1.1-inch guns for close-range defense and 2 quad torpedo launchers for anti-shipping. With the Atlanta class being intended to be a flotilla leader, this gave the flotilla much more firepower, with the ship having 3 turrets in superfire sets just forward of the bridge along with 3 more aft of the funnels, and 1 either side of the rear superstructure next to the quad torpedo launchers. This meant that the Atlantas could fire a maximum of 14 5-inch rounds at a target at once. The 5-inch guns also had 2 Mark 37 fire control systems located forward and aft of the funnels on top of the superstructure. The Atlanta class had armor ranging in thickness from 28mm to 95mm, primarily to stop fragmentation rather than direct impacts. Fully loaded with fuel, ammo and crew, the Atlanta class weighed in at 7,400 tons. The ship was powered by 4 665 psi boilers which drove 2 geared steam turbines producing around 75,000 horsepower, giving the Atlanta class a top speed of just over 32 knots or 36 miles per hour, which was only marginally slower than the destroyers it would be tasked with. The Atlantas had a maximum range of 8,500 nautical miles, provided they didn't exceed 15 knots. The ship had a crew complement of 35 officers and 638 enlisted men, along with the accommodation for a flag officer and their staff. After the attack of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, 4 Atlanta-class light cruisers were hurried into completion, with the USS Atlanta, CL-51, being commissioned into service on December 24, 1941. The USS Juno, CL-52, commissioned on February 14, 1942, USS San Diego, CL-53, commissioned January 10, 1942, and USS San Juan, CL-54, commissioned on February 28, 1942. The Atlanta and Juno were constructed at the Federal Shipbuilding and Dry Dock Company in New Jersey, whilst the USS San Diego and San Juan were constructed by Bethlehem Steel Corporation at Fall River Shipyard in Massachusetts. There was a total of 8 ships planned, however the further forward become the Oakland subclass, with the lead ship, USS Oakland, being commissioned on July 17, 1943. The 4 Oakland class would be the USS Oakland, CL-95, USS Reno, CL-96, USS Flint, CL-97, and USS Tucson, CL-98, but we'll discuss the subclass later, along with the changes that were made to the original design. The first deployment of the Atlanta class was at the Battle of Midway in mid-1942, where the USS Atlanta served as an escort for the carrier group. It was quickly realised that the class excelled in air defence roles, with the ability to fire 17,600 pounds or 8,000 kilograms of shells per minute at incoming aircraft. However, one of the Atlanta class's drawbacks was also noticed. The ship lacked an effective close-range defence. As a result, the Atlantas were upgraded to mount an additional 1.1-inch quad mount along with a number of 20mm Oerlikon autocannons. The next major deployment of the Atlanta class was at the Battle of Guadalcanal, where the USS Atlanta and USS Juno were both sent alongside the heavy cruisers USS San Francisco and USS Portland, the light cruiser USS Helena, and several destroyers to meet the Japanese fleet. During the night of November 13, 1942, the first day of the naval battle, the USS Atlanta was heavily damaged by Japanese surface vessels as well as accidentally being fired upon by the USS San Francisco, leading to her crew later abandoning ship and scuttling her. The USS Juno was also sunk during the battle, taking heavy damage from Japanese surface vessels, eventually being struck by a torpedo from the Japanese submarine I-26 and sinking. The sinking of Atlanta and Juno would be the only losses for the Atlanta and Oakland class during the war and accounted for 2 out of 3 light cruiser losses for the US Navy during the entirety of World War II. After the battle, it had become very apparent that the 5-inch guns were ineffective against the larger Japanese surface ships, and so the remaining 2 ships of the Atlanta class were optimized for anti-air defense and would serve as carrier escorts for the rest of the war. The Oakland subclass was also be born from the modifications to optimize the AA capability of the Atlantas. The significant change for the subclass was the removal of the 5-inch dual mounts on the port and starboard side of the ship, replacing them with the newer 40mm dual Bofors mounts, and the removal of the 1.1-inch quad mounts in favour of extra 20mm Oerlikon cannons. This was in part to increase the stability of the ship. Since the class was tall and it had a high centre of mass, this would lead to heavy roll in tight turns, and potentially, if the ship was to flood, the potential for the ship to capsize is much higher. Ironically, although the changes, at least for a short while, increased the ship's stability, it began to become more and more unstable as the subclass was further upgraded. With the Oaklands becoming true anti-air cruisers and the Japanese air attacks increasing in intensity, it was deemed soon after their 1943 introduction that an even stronger anti-air complement was needed. With the addition of quad mounts of 40mm guns and even more 20mm cannons, the subclass was beginning to become more and more unstable. By comparison, when the first of the Atlanta class entered service with the USS Atlanta, she only had 16 5-inch guns and dual turrets with 3 quad mounts of 1.1-inch guns. The Oakland class in 1945 had 6 dual mount 5-inch gun turrets, 4 quad mount 40mm guns, 4 dual mount 40mm guns, 16 single 20mm cannons, along with 6 depth charge projectors and 2 depth charge tracks. Essentially, all the available deck space on the Oakland subclass was filled with some kind of weapon system. Since the ships would no longer need a flag officer as they were now AA cruisers, the additional accommodation was used for the additional gun crews. The crew complement was now 47 officers and 766 enlisted men from the original 35 officers and 638 crew. The subclass was also almost 1,000 tons heavier when fully loaded than the original Atlantas, whilst retaining the same basic hull, engines and armour, although they could reach a very similar max speed, but they did sit several feet lower in the water. During the night of November 3rd, 1944, whilst operating as a part of Task Force 38, the USS Reno, CL-96, was struck by 2 torpedoes from the Japanese submarine I-41. One of the torpedoes failed to explode and lodged itself into Reno's port side, whilst the other exploded, causing a large fire and serious flooding, killing 46 of her crew. She was kept afloat by the efforts of damage control crews and was later attacked again the following day unsuccessfully. The torpedo lodged in her side was later disarmed, and USS Reno was towed more than 1,500 miles to be repaired. The remaining 6 of the Atlanta and Oakland subclass, including USS Reno, survived the war, earning a collective 54 battle stars and were exclusively operated by the United States Navy. The remaining ships were all decommissioned between 1947 and 1949, being placed in the US Navy's reserve fleet, with their designation of CL being changed to CLAA in 1949. None of the surviving ships were ever recommissioned into active service and were struck from the Naval Register and fully scrapped by 1970, and so unfortunately none remain today. 172 men were killed aboard the USS Atlanta when she sunk, and 687 men were killed aboard the USS Juneau. Both wrecks of the USS Atlanta and USS Juneau remain where they were sunk in November of 1942. So how does the USS Atlanta perform in-game? It is a rank 4, battle rating 5.3 US light cruiser in the Blue Water Fleet tech tree. She is armed with 8 dual 5-inch gun turrets with the ability to fire high explosive, special common or semi-armor piercing, and anti-air variable time fuse shells for dual purpose use. She is also armed with 3 quad mounts of 1.1-inch guns for close range defense, and has 2 quad mounts of torpedo tubes. The 5-inch guns can fire up to 22 rounds per minute each with an aced crew. 7 of the 8 turrets can be brought to bear against enemy ships at any one time. The guns can effectively hit targets up to 5 miles away and have an absolute maximum range of little over 7.5 miles, but will lack consistency due to their small caliber when compared to other cruisers. As mentioned, the USS Atlanta has armour ranging from 28 to 95mm across her for stopping fragmentation and will not survive hits from direct impacts. She can achieve a top speed of just over 37 miles per hour forward and only 13.5 miles per hour in reverse. Due to the relatively small caliber of her main armament and minimal armour, the Atlanta will struggle in open sea combat. However, at close range, with her incredible rate of fire, you can literally pepper enemy ships to death. With the AAVT shells, you can make easy work of attacking aircraft, and ideally you want to play the ship in a supporting role, especially when up tier to 6.0 games where you stand no chance of killing dreadnoughts and the heavier cruisers. I recommend loading half AAVT and half of the semi-armor piercing shells. The reason being is that the semi-armor piercing shells stand a better chance of damaging modules of enemy ships, especially when firing at light cruisers, and the AAVT shells can be used for both the anti-air and anti-ship role as HE. In terms of numbers, I recommend bringing full ammo simply due to the fact that if you get hit by a shell and it sets off your magazine, you will probably die anyway. Plus, it's relatively common to be using 300 plus rounds per kill. Your main focus in up-tiered games should be protecting friendly ships from aircraft and lighter surface ships like destroyers and PT boats. However, if you're lucky enough to get a down tier, focus entirely on killing enemy destroyers with their magnificent rate of fire. You can make relatively light work of them. It is however worth mentioning that you should always try and plan your moves and your route, since the USS Atlanta maneuvers like a semi-truck trying to make a U-turn in an alleyway. Overall, the Atlanta is fun and it's relatively easy to play, and I have had a lot of enjoyment from playing it. For those of you that are wondering if the horrible grind through the naval tree is worth it, well, I personally think it is. Anyways guys, thank you very much for watching, and if you've enjoyed today's video, please consider leaving a like, and of course if you're new here and you like what we do, please consider subscribing. If you'd like to see a vehicle or battle on the series, let me know in the comment section below, and if you guys use Discord and would like to have a better way to connect with me and the rest of the Gaming with Henry community, there is a link below that you can join with. Thanks again everyone, and I will see you next time.